The sharp, resounding crack of Captain Robert Hayes's open palm echoed through the first-class cabin like a gunshot. He had just slapped a young black woman across the face, a woman sitting quietly in seat 2A with a valid boarding pass and a glass of sparkling water. He did it in front of dozens of witnesses. He did it while wearing the uniform of Skyline Airways, and he had absolutely no idea that the woman he just struck owned 45% of his entire airline. What happens next will leave you speechless. If you're new here, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from so we can see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. Jada Mitchell had a ritual each morning. She would sit at her kitchen table in her penthouse overlooking downtown Atlanta, pour herself a single cup of black coffee, and read the customer complaint emails forwarded from Skyline Airways' internal system. Not summaries, not reports. The actual emails word for word. Every frustrated mother who missed a connection because of a gate change nobody announced. Every elderly veteran who got spoken to like a child by a gate agent. Every business traveler who paid $4,000 for a first-class seat and received cold food and a dirty blanket. She read them all. Most CEOs, most shareholders, most people with the kind of money Jada had, they never touched those emails. They had people for that. Layers and layers of people whose job it was to make sure the ugly truth never reached the top. But Jada was not most people. She had built her first app as a teenager, sold her first company in her early 20s, and soon quietly acquired a 45% stake in Skyline Airways through a web of holding companies and investment trusts, so complex that even the airline's own board of directors didn't know her face. They knew the name of her holding company. They knew the money was real. But they had never met her. Not once. And that was exactly how Jada wanted it. One morning, one email caught her attention. It was from a woman named Eleanor Grant, 68 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Memphis. Eleanor had written 3 paragraphs, and every sentence carried the weight of someone who had been deeply, personally humiliated. She described how a Skyline gate agent had pulled her out of the priority boarding line and loudly questioned whether she really had a first-class ticket. Eleanor had traveled first class dozens of times. She had her boarding pass on her phone. She had her confirmation number. None of that mattered. The agent looked at her clothes, looked at her skin, and decided she didn't belong. Jada read the email twice. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her phone, and called the one person she trusted more than anyone in the world. "Megan," Jada said, "clear my schedule for the flight." Megan Thompson had been Jada's executive assistant for several years. She knew that tone. It was the tone Jada used right before she did something that made lawyers nervous. "What are you planning?" Megan asked. "I'm flying Skyline," Jada said. "Atlanta to Chicago, first class, but I'm not flying as myself." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jada, the last time you went undercover at one of your own companies, you fired 11 people in one afternoon. And every single one of them deserved it. I'm not arguing that. I'm asking if you're ready for what you might find." Jada set her coffee cup down. "That's exactly why I need to go." When the day came, Jada barely recognized herself in the mirror. Gone were the tailored blazers, the designer heels, the diamond studs she usually wore. Instead, she put on a plain gray sweatshirt, faded jeans, and white sneakers. She pulled her braids back into a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except a thin gold chain her grandmother had given her when she was 12. She looked like any other young woman heading home to visit family. That was the point. At Hartsfield-Jackson, she moved through the terminal like a ghost. Nobody looked twice at her. Nobody stepped aside to let her pass. Nobody said, "Right this way, ma'am." She was invisible, and the invisibility itself was data. She made mental notes. The gate area was understaffed. 2 of the 3 check-in kiosks were out of order. A family with small children was struggling with oversized luggage, and not a single Skyline employee offered to help. When boarding began, Jada joined the first-class line. A gate agent, a young man with a tight smile, scanned her boarding pass without looking up. It beeped green. He waved her through. No issues, not yet. She walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the aircraft. The smell hit her first. Stale air, like the ventilation system hadn't been serviced in months. She filed that away, too. Duh. A flight attendant greeted her at the door. The woman's name tag read Linda. "Welcome aboard," Linda said, her voice pleasant enough, but her eyes already looking past Jada to the next passenger. "Thank you," Jada said quietly, and made her way to seat 2A. First class on this particular aircraft was a small cabin. 4 rows, 2 seats per row on the left, 2 on the right. 16 seats total. Jada settled into her seat by the window, tucked her small backpack under the seat in front of her, and pulled out a paperback novel. She wanted to look relaxed. She wanted to look like she wasn't paying attention, but she was paying attention to everything. The other first-class passengers filtered in. A man in a navy suit who immediately opened his laptop. A couple in their 60s who held hands as they sat down. A woman with a designer handbag who snapped at Linda for not having her preferred sparkling water ready. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Robert Hayes stepped into the first-class cabin, and the air seemed to shift. He was tall, in his mid-50s with silver hair, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been arguing with people for 3 decades. His uniform was immaculate, every crease pressed, every button polished. He carried himself like a man who believed the airplane was his kingdom, and everyone on it was a guest he could choose to tolerate or remove. He walked through first class, slowly making eye contact with passengers. When he passed the man in the navy suit, he nodded. When he passed the elderly couple, he smiled. When he reached the woman with the designer handbag, he actually stopped to exchange pleasantries. Then he reached row 2. He looked at Jada, and he stopped walking. It wasn't a casual glance. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement he'd given everyone else. He stared at her. His eyes moved from her face to her sweatshirt to her sneakers and back to her face. Jada felt it immediately, that cold, calculating sweep of judgment. She had felt it before many times in boardrooms and banks and restaurants and airports. The look that said, "You don't belong here." She turned a page in her book and said nothing. Captain Hayes took one more step forward and leaned down slightly. "Excuse me, miss." Jada looked up. "Yes." "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" There it was. The question that wasn't really a question. The challenge dressed up as politeness. "Yes, I'm sure," Jada said. "Seat 2A. This is first class," Captain Hayes said, as if she might not have noticed. "I know," Jada said. "I have a first-class ticket." He didn't move. He stood there blocking the aisle, looking down at her with an expression that was halfway between suspicion and contempt. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Jada felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice even. The gate agent already scanned it. "I'd like to see it myself." Something about the way he said it made the man in the navy suit look up from his laptop. The elderly couple exchanged a glance. The cabin was small enough that everyone could hear every word. Jada reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. She opened the boarding pass on the Skyline app and held it up for him to see. He took the phone from her hand, without asking, held it close to his face, and studied it for what felt like an unreasonable amount of time. Jada Mitchell, he read aloud. Then he looked at her again as if the name and the face didn't match some picture in his head. "That's me," Jada said. He handed the phone back, but he still didn't move. "How did you purchase this ticket?" he asked. Now Linda, the flight attendant, appeared behind the captain. She looked uncomfortable. "Captain Hayes, her ticket is confirmed. I checked the manifest." "I didn't ask you, Linda," he said without turning around. Linda flinched but didn't retreat. "Sir, she's a confirmed first-class passenger. Everything checks out." Captain Hayes finally looked back at Linda, and his expression made it clear that her input was not welcome. "I'll handle this." He turned back to Jada. "I've been flying for Skyline for 22 years. I know when something doesn't look right." Jada closed her book. She folded her hands in her lap. "And what exactly doesn't look right, Captain?" He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he straightened up, tugged at the bottom of his uniform jacket, and said, "I'm going to have someone verify your ticket with the gate." "It's already been verified," Jada said. "Twice. Then a third time shouldn't be a problem." He turned and walked back toward the front of the cabin. Linda lingered for a moment, her eyes wide with apology. "I am so sorry," Linda whispered. "I don't know why he's doing this." Jada looked at her, really looked at her. "I think we both know why." Linda's face crumbled. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Soon after, Captain Hayes returned with a senior gate agent, a woman named Karen, who looked like she had been pulled away from something important and wasn't happy about it. Karen walked directly to Jada's seat, checked the boarding pass one more time, cross-referenced it with her tablet, and turned to Captain Hayes. "She's confirmed, Captain. First class, seat 2A paid in full. No issues." Captain Hayes' jaw tightened. Fine. But he didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the disruption. He didn't look at Jada again. He simply walked back to the cockpit and closed the door behind him. Karen leaned toward Jada. "I'm sorry about that. Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you," Jada said. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her hands were trembling under her book. Not from fear. From the effort it took to stay calm when every cell in her body wanted to stand up and say, "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what I could do to this airline with one phone call?" She didn't say it. She couldn't. Because this wasn't about her ego. This was about every Eleanor Grant who had written that email. Every person who had been made to feel small by someone in a uniform. If Jada revealed herself now, it would end the experiment. The captain would apologize, the airline would spin it, and nothing would change. So she swallowed her rage. She opened her book, and she waited. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played. The engines hummed. Jada stared out the window as Atlanta shrank beneath her, and she made herself a quiet promise. Whatever happened on this flight, she would remember it. She would use it. And when the time came, she would make sure Captain Robert Hayes and everyone who enabled him understood exactly what they had done. The seatbelt sign turned off. Linda brought drinks to the first-class cabin. She served the man in the Navy suit a whiskey. She brought the elderly couple 2 glasses of white wine. She offered the woman with the designer handbag her preferred sparkling water, which had apparently been located. When she reached Jada, Linda set down a glass of sparkling water with a thin slice of lemon. "I brought you this, on me. Well, on the airline, you know what I mean." Jada smiled. "Thank you, Linda." Linda hesitated, then lowered her voice. "That wasn't okay. What happened back there? I want you to know that." "How often does it happen?" Jada asked. Linda's eyes darted toward the cockpit door, more than it should. Has anyone reported it? Linda straightened up quickly, as if she'd said too much. I should check on the other passengers. She moved away, but her hands were shaking. Jada sipped her water and stared at the cockpit door. Behind that door sat a man who believed his rank, his seniority, and his uniform gave him the right to humiliate a passenger, based on nothing more than the way she looked. And behind him stood a company culture that had allowed it to happen again and again and again. As the flight continued, the cockpit door opened again. Captain Hayes walked out. He didn't go to the lavatory. He didn't stretch his legs. He walked directly to row 2 and stood over Jada's seat. I need you to come with me, he said. Jada looked up. Excuse me. I need to speak with you privately in the galley. The elderly woman across the aisle put down her wine glass. The man in the navy suit pulled out one of his earbuds. Even the woman with the designer handbag paused mid-scroll on her phone. About what? Jada asked. About your presence on this flight. My presence has been confirmed 3 times, Captain. I'm not going anywhere. His face reddened. Something shifted behind his eyes. This wasn't about procedure anymore. This was personal. He had been challenged in front of his cabin, and his pride wouldn't let it go. I am the captain of this aircraft, he said, his voice rising just enough to carry. When I ask you to step out of your seat, you step out of your seat. Jada met his gaze without blinking. And I am a paying passenger who has done nothing wrong. I'm staying in my seat. The cabin went completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was the kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. Linda rushed forward. Captain, please. She hasn't done anything. There's no reason to escalate this. Step back, Linda, Hayes said through clenched teeth. But sir, the passengers are watching. This is going to become a situation. It's already a situation, Hayes snapped. And it became a situation the moment this woman refused a direct order from the captain. I refused an unreasonable request, Jada corrected him. There's a difference. Hayes's hand gripped the back of the seat in front of Jada. His knuckles went white. You think you're clever, don't you? I think I paid for a ticket and sat in my seat and read my book and did nothing to bother anyone, Jada said. And I think you walked out of that cockpit looking for a problem that doesn't exist. The man in the navy suit cleared his throat. She's right, Captain. She hasn't done anything. Hayes whipped his head toward the man. I didn't ask for your input, sir. The elderly woman across the aisle spoke up. Young lady, are you all right? I'm fine, ma'am, Jada said. Thank you for asking. She's disrupting this cabin, Hayes announced to no one in particular. The only disruption I see is you, Captain, the elderly woman said, and her husband squeezed her hand. Hayes's breathing grew heavier. The veins in his neck became visible. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. In his 22 years of flying, he had never been challenged like this. Not by a passenger, not in front of his cabin, and certainly not by a young woman in a gray sweatshirt who refused to shrink. He made a decision in that moment. A decision fueled not by reason, not by policy, not by anything resembling professionalism. It was fueled by rage, pure, unchecked rage, at a woman who had dared to look him in the eye and say no. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. I am going to have you removed from this aircraft the moment we land, and I will personally make sure you never fly Skyline again. Jada's voice was barely above a whisper. That would be a very expensive mistake, Captain. He didn't understand what she meant. He wouldn't understand for some time. But something about the calm in her voice, the absolute absence of fear, It unnerved him in a way he couldn't name. He pulled back. He stared at her. And in that stare was 22 years of unchecked authority. 22 years of nobody telling him no. 22 years of a system that had protected him and promoted him and looked the other way. He straightened his jacket. He turned on his heel, and he walked back to the cockpit without another word. The elderly woman exhaled. Lord, have mercy. Linda appeared immediately at Jada's side. Are you okay? Do you want me to file a report? I can contact ground operations. Not yet, Jada said. Let's see what happens when we land. Linda stared at her. You're incredibly calm for someone who just went through that. I've been through worse, Jada said, and she meant it. Not because she was tough, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned over years of navigating spaces that didn't want her, that the most powerful thing she could do was refuse to break. She picked up her book again. Her hands had stopped trembling. But inside her mind, a clock had started ticking. She had the rest of the flight until they landed in Chicago. The rest of the flight to decide how to use what had just happened. The rest of the flight before the world she had built in silence would collide with the world that had just tried to tear her down in public. Captain Robert Hayes had no idea what was coming. Neither did Skyline Airways. Neither did anyone watching from those first-class seats with their phones half raised, wondering if they should have recorded more. Jada turned a page she didn't read and thought about Eleanor Grant. She thought about every email she had ever read at that kitchen table. She thought about the tremor in Linda's voice when she said, more than it should. Then Jada Mitchell, the young silent billionaire backer of Skyline Airways, the woman nobody on that plane recognized, the woman who could buy and sell everyone in that cabin 10 times over, did something that would have confused Captain Hayes if he had seen it. She smiled. It was a small smile, quiet and private, and it carried the weight of a decision that had just been made. Not a decision to forgive, not a decision to forget, a decision to wait, to watch, to gather every piece of evidence until the case was airtight and the walls were closing in and there was nowhere left for anyone to hide. Because Jada Mitchell didn't destroy her enemies in the heat of the moment. She destroyed them slowly, methodically, and with the kind of patience that only comes from knowing exactly how the story ends. And this story was far from over. As the flight continued, the seatbelt sign flickered back on. Turbulence. The plane shuddered, and Linda moved through the cabin collecting glasses. She paused at Jada's seat, gave her a small nod, and took the empty water glass without a word. There was something unspoken between them now, a silent understanding that what had happened earlier was not finished. Jada knew it too. She could feel it the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color. Captain Hayes was not the kind of man who let things go. He was the kind of man who circled back, who let the silence build until the other person relaxed and then struck again when they thought it was over. She was right. Later in the flight, the cockpit door opened once more. Captain Hayes walked out and went straight to the galley. He spoke to Linda in a low voice, but the galley was close enough that first class was quiet and sound carried. I want her moved, Hayes said. Linda's voice was careful. Moved where, Captain? Economy. There's an open middle seat. Captain, I can't do that. She has a confirmed first-class ticket. There's no policy that allows me to downgrade a passenger without cause. I'm giving you cause. What cause? Hayes's voice dropped even lower, but Jada caught every word. She's making the other passengers uncomfortable. Linda didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was tight. No one has complained, sir. Not a single person. I'm complaining. You're the captain, not a passenger. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Jada kept her eyes on her book, but her ears were locked on every syllable. She could hear Hayes breathing through his nose, the way men breathe when they're trying to control their temper, and failing. "Linda," he said, and his voice had changed. It was quieter now, almost gentle, which made it more dangerous. "I've been flying this route since before you graduated high school. I've handled situations you can't even imagine. When I tell you something doesn't feel right, I need you to trust my judgment. And I need you to trust the manifest, Captain. She belongs in that seat." Hayes said nothing for a long moment. Then he walked out of the galley and stood in the aisle between rows 1 and 2. He wasn't looking at Jada. He was looking at the other passengers, scanning their faces, searching for an ally. Someone who shared his discomfort. Someone who would validate what he was doing. The man in the Navy suit avoided his eyes. The elderly couple stared straight ahead. The woman with the designer handbag was asleep or pretending to be. Nobody was on his side, and the loneliness of that realization twisted something inside him. He turned to Jada. "I've contacted ground operations in Chicago. There will be someone waiting for you at the gate when we land." Jada lowered her book. "For what?" "For a conversation about your behavior on this flight." "My behavior?" Jada repeated. "I've been sitting in this seat reading a book. You've been combative and uncooperative with the flight crew. I answered every question you asked me. I showed you my boarding pass. I stayed in my seat. What part of that was combative?" The man in the Navy suit pulled out his phone and angled it toward the aisle. He didn't hold it up, obviously. He just rested it on his armrest with the camera facing out. Jada noticed. Hayes did not. "I'm documenting this interaction for your safety and mine," Hayes said, which was a phrase he had clearly rehearsed. "When we land, I'll be filing a formal report." "File whatever you want," Jada said. "I've done nothing wrong and you know it." Something in her voice hit him. Not the words, the certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of a woman who was not afraid of him. Not afraid of his uniform, not afraid of his authority, not afraid of his report or his ground operations or any of the tools he was used to wielding against people who couldn't fight back. He leaned forward. "Who are you?" The question surprised her, not because it was aggressive, but because it was genuine. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was actually confused. In his world, people like Jada didn't talk back to captains. They didn't sit still while being threatened. They didn't look at him with steady eyes and say, "File whatever you want," like they meant it. "I'm a passenger," Jada said. "That's all you need to know. Nobody talks to me the way you're talking to me. Maybe that's the problem." His right hand clenched. Jada saw it. Linda saw it. The elderly woman across the aisle saw it and grabbed her husband's arm. "Captain," Linda said sharply, "please return to the cockpit." Hayes didn't move. His eyes were locked on Jada, and there was something building behind them that went beyond anger. It was the look of a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in control, and control was slipping away from him, 1 second at a time. "You think you can just sit there and disrespect me on my own aircraft?" he said. "I have not disrespected you," Jada said. "But you have disrespected me multiple times in front of witnesses, and every single person in this cabin knows it." The elderly man across the aisle cleared his throat. "She's right, Captain. You need to walk away." Hayes spun toward him. "Sir, I will not be told how to run my aircraft by a passenger." "Then run it," the old man said. "Go fly the plane and leave this young woman alone." Hayes's face went from red to purple. His jaw locked. His body was coiled so tight that the buttons on his jacket looked like they might pop. And then something broke. It didn't happen slowly. It happened in a flash, the way violence always does. 1 second, Hayes was standing in the aisle clenching his jaw, and the next second his hand was in the air. And the next second after that, it connected with the side of Jada's face. The sound was sickening. A sharp, wet crack that bounced off the walls of the cabin and hung in the air like smoke. Jada's head snapped to the left. Her book fell to the floor. Her lips split against her teeth and a thin line of blood ran down her chin. The cabin exploded. Linda screamed. The elderly woman screamed. The man in the navy suit jumped to his feet with his phone now held high, recording everything. The woman with the designer handbag woke up and started shouting, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" Hayes stood there with his hands still raised, fingers open, as if his body had acted before his brain could catch up. For one terrible second, he looked at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. Jada didn't move. She sat in her seat with blood on her lip and her hands in her lap, and she looked up at Captain Robert Hayes with an expression that he would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. It was pity. And that pity enraged him more than anything she had ever said. "You did this to yourself," he hissed. "You pushed me." "Captain Hayes." Linda's voice was shaking so hard the words barely came out straight. "Step away from the passenger right now." The second flight attendant, a young man named Jason, who had been working economy class, rushed into the first-class cabin. He took one look at Jada's face, one look at Hayes' hand, and his eyes went wide. "What happened?" Jason asked. "He hit her," the elderly woman said. "He walked up to this young lady and slapped her across the face. I saw the whole thing." "We all saw it," the man in the navy suit said. "And I have it on video." Hayes pointed at Jada. "This woman has been disruptive since she boarded. She refused to comply with crew instructions. She is a threat to the safety of this flight." "She was reading a book," Linda shouted. She had never raised her voice to a captain before. In her years of flying, she had never once broken the chain of command. But something inside her had snapped too. "She was reading a book, Robert. She was sitting in her seat reading a book, and you walked out here and put your hands on her. I saw everything. Jason, call the air marshal if there's one on board and contact Chicago approach. We need law enforcement at the gate." Hayes' composure cracked. "Linda, if you undermine my authority one more time, I will have your wings pulled." "My wings?" Linda laughed. It was a bitter, broken laugh. "Captain, you just assaulted a passenger in front of the entire first-class cabin. You don't have the authority to pull anything anymore." Hayes turned to Jason. "Get this woman off first class. Move her to economy now." Jason didn't move. He looked at Linda. Linda shook her head. "Nobody is moving her anywhere," Linda said. "She's staying in her seat and you are returning to the cockpit immediately. Your co-pilot can land this plane if you can't control yourself." Jada reached down and picked up her book from the floor. Her hands were steady. The blood on her lip had already started to dry. She opened the book to a random page and placed it in her lap, not to read, but to have something to hold, something to anchor her while the world tilted sideways around her. The elderly woman unbuckled her seatbelt and crossed the aisle. She sat on the armrest of the empty seat next to Jada and put her hand on Jada's shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "I'm okay," Jada said. "No, you're not. And you don't have to pretend you are. My name is Barbara. Barbara Sutton. My husband Harold and I saw everything, and we're not going to let anyone pretend this didn't happen." Harold Sutton stood up from his seat. He was in his 70s with a bad knee and a soft voice. But when he spoke, it carried the weight of a man who had seen enough of the world to know exactly what he was looking at. "Captain, my name is Harold Sutton. I'm a retired federal judge, and what you just did constitutes assault and battery under federal aviation law. I strongly advise you to return to the cockpit and speak to no one until we are on the ground and you have an attorney present." Hayes stared at Harold. The word judge had landed like a punch. "This isn't what it looks like," Hayes said, but his voice had lost its edge. The authority was draining out of him in real time, like air leaking from a tire. "It is exactly what it looks like," Harold said, "and there are dozens of witnesses and at least 3 cell phone recordings that will confirm it. Walk away, Captain, now while you still can." Hayes looked around the cabin. Every face stared back at him with the same expression, disgust. Not confusion, not uncertainty, pure, unfiltered disgust. He turned without a word and walked back to the cockpit. The door closed behind him, and the latch clicked with a finality that sounded like a verdict. Linda knelt next to Jada's seat. Her eyes were full of tears. "I'm getting you ice and a first aid kit. Jason is calling ahead to Chicago. There will be police at the gate." "Thank you," Jada said. "I should have stopped him sooner. I should have stepped between you. You did what you could. It wasn't enough." Jada looked at Linda and saw a woman carrying guilt she didn't deserve. "Linda, you spoke up. You defied your captain in front of the entire cabin. Do you understand how much courage that took?" Linda wiped her eyes. "It's not courage. It's basic decency. You'd be surprised how rare that is." Barbara Sutton was still sitting on the armrest beside Jada, her hand still on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, do you have someone you can call when we land? Family, a lawyer?" Jada thought about Megan sitting in her office in Atlanta, monitoring her phone, waiting for an update. She thought about the legal team on retainer, the PR team on standby, the entire infrastructure of her silent empire that could be activated with a single text message. "I have people," Jada said, "but not yet." Barbara studied her face. "You're taking this awfully well for someone who just got hit." "It's not the first time someone told me I didn't belong somewhere," Jada said. "It's just the first time someone backed it up with their hand." Barbara squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you decide to do about this, Harold and I will testify. Anywhere. On any time. You have our word." "Mine too," the man in the Navy suit said from across the aisle. He held up his phone. Clear video and audio. His face, your face, the whole thing. "So do I," said a woman in the back whom Jada hadn't even noticed before. She was holding her phone, too. "I started recording when he came out of the cockpit the second time." Jada looked around the cabin and realized something that made her chest tighten. These people, strangers, every one of them, had formed a wall around her. Not because they knew who she was, not because she was rich or powerful or important, because they had witnessed something wrong. And they refused to look away. For the first time since Captain Hayes had first approached her seat, Jada felt her eyes sting. She blinked it away. Not now. Not yet. There would be time for tears later. Right now, she needed to think. The plane would land in Chicago soon. When it did, everything would accelerate. Police would board. Statements would be taken. Hayes would try to spin his version of events. The airline's legal machinery would activate, and the first instinct of every corporate lawyer in America when faced with a situation like this was to protect the company, not the victim. Jada needed to be ready. She excused herself to the lavatory. Barbara moved aside and Linda gave her a warm towel for her face. In the tiny bathroom, Jada locked the door, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw the bruise already forming on her left cheek. Her lip was swollen. A thin cut ran along the inside of her lower lip where her teeth had caught the skin. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Megan. 6 words. It happened. Worse than expected. Stand by. Megan replied quickly. Tell me everything. Not yet. Landing soon. Need legal on the ground in Chicago. Quietly. Nobody knows who I am. Keep it that way. Done. Anything else? Jada typed one more message. Pull every employee complaint filed against Captain Robert Hayes. Every one. And find out who's been burying them. She put her phone away and looked at herself in the mirror one more time. The woman staring back at her didn't look like a billionaire. She didn't look like a mogul or a disruptor or a corporate powerhouse. She looked like a young woman with a bruised face and blood on her sweatshirt. And that was the most dangerous thing about Jada Mitchell. People saw what they wanted to see. They saw the sweatshirt and the sneakers and the braids, and they made their assumptions and they moved on. They never looked deeper. They never considered the possibility that the quiet woman in seat 2A was the one holding all the cards. She washed her face, patted it dry, and walked back to her seat. Barbara and Harold Sutton were waiting. Linda had placed a small ice pack wrapped in a cloth napkin on Jada's armrest. The man in the navy suit gave her a nod that said, "We've got you." Jada sat down, pressed the ice to her cheek, and opened her book one more time. Behind the cockpit door, Captain Robert Hayes sat in his chair and stared at the clouds. His hand was still tingling. The co-pilot, a younger man named Chris Parker, had not said a word since Hayes returned, but his silence was louder than any accusation. "Aren't you going to say something?" Hayes finally asked. Chris kept his eyes on the instruments. "I don't think there's anything I can say that will help you right now, Captain." "She provoked me." Chris said nothing. She was combative. She refused to cooperate. Chris checked the altimeter and made a minor adjustment. His silence was calculated, deliberate, and absolute. "I've given 22 years to this airline," Hayes said. 22 years without a single incident on my record." "You have an incident now," Chris said quietly, and he didn't say another word for the rest of the flight. When the wheels touched down at O'Hare, the plane taxied to the gate. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime, and passengers in economy began reaching for their bags. But in first class, nobody moved. They waited. They watched. They held their phones. Linda picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Chicago O'Hare. Please remain seated for a moment. We have personnel meeting the aircraft." The forward door opened soon after. 2 Chicago PD officers boarded first, followed by a Skyline Airways ground supervisor named Paul, who looked like he had been pulled out of a meeting and hadn't been told why. Paul stepped into first class and saw Jada's face, the bruise, the swollen lip, the ice pack. "What happened here?" Paul asked, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Your captain assaulted a passenger," Harold Sutton said, already on his feet. "I'm retired Judge Harold Sutton, and I witnessed the entire incident. So did my wife. So did every person in this cabin." The officers exchanged a look. One of them, a woman with short brown hair and a calm voice, knelt beside Jada's seat. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reyes. Can you tell me what happened?" Jada told her. She told her calmly, clearly, and without embellishment. She described every interaction, every confrontation, every escalation. She described the moment Captain Hayes' hand connected with her face. She described the sound it made and the taste of blood in her mouth. Officer Reyes listened without interrupting. When Jada finished, Reyes turned to her partner. "Get the captain off this aircraft. Separate him from all passengers and crew. I want him in the supervisor's office with the door closed." "He's still in the cockpit," Linda said. "Not for long," Reyes said. She walked to the cockpit door and knocked. "Captain Hayes, this is the Chicago Police Department. Open the door, please." The door opened slowly. Hayes stood in the frame, still in his uniform, still wearing his captain's wings. But something had changed in his face. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the dawning terrible realization that his world was about to collapse. "Captain, step out of the cockpit, please." He stepped out. He looked at Jada. He looked at the bruise on her face, the one his hand had put there. And for 1/2 of a second, something flickered in his eyes that might have been regret. But then it was gone. "I want to speak with my union representative," he said. "You'll have that opportunity," Officer Reyes said. "Right now. I need you to come with me." They walked him off the plane. Every first-class passenger watched him go. Every economy passenger craned their necks to see what was happening. Phones were raised. Videos were recording. The man who had walked onto this aircraft as a captain walked off it as a suspect. Jada watched him disappear down the jet bridge. Then she picked up her bags, stood up, and turned to Barbara and Harold Sutton. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you." Barbara hugged her. It was unexpected and warm and fierce. "You call us, whatever you need." Harold handed her a business card. "My personal number is on the back. Use it." The man in the Navy suit approached. "My name is Matt Rodriguez. I'm an attorney. Corporate law, not criminal, but I know people. Here's my card. The video is already backed up to my cloud. Nobody can delete it." Jada took the card. She looked at Matt, at Barbara, at Harold, at Linda, who was standing by the galley with tears streaming down her face. "I won't forget this," Jada said. "Any of it." She walked off the plane and into the jet bridge where Paul, the ground supervisor, was waiting with a clipboard and a face full of corporate panic. "Ma'am, on behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience today. We take incidents like this extremely seriously, and I want to assure you that we will be conducting a full investigation." Jada looked at him. "What's your name?" "Paul. Paul Jenkins. I'm the station supervisor here at O'Hare." "Paul, has anyone from Skyline's corporate office called you?" Paul hesitated. "Not yet. I just found out about this when the gate agent told me police were boarding." "They will call," Jada said. "And when they do, they're going to tell you to contain this. They're going to tell you to get my signature on a release form, offer me a travel voucher, and make this go away as quietly as possible. Am I wrong?" Paul said nothing, but his face told her everything. "I'm not signing anything," Jada said. "I'm not accepting any vouchers, and this is not going away." She walked past him through the gate and into the terminal. Her cheek throbbed. Her lips stung. Her phone buzzed in her pocket with a message from Megan. "Legal team on the ground. Attorney named Claire Brooks waiting at arrivals. Black SUV, plate number KR4471. Nobody knows your identity. Also, the Hayes complaint files. Jada, there are 14. 14 complaints. Every single one was closed without action." Jada stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the terminal with travelers flowing around her like water around a stone. 14 complaints, everyone buried. She typed back 2 words, "Not anymore." Claire Brooks was already standing beside the black SUV when Jada pushed through the arrivals door. She was a small woman with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of posture that said she had won more courtroom battles than she had lost. She opened the rear door without a word, and Jada climbed in. The door closed. The noise of the airport disappeared. "Let me see your face," Claire said. Jada turned toward her. Claire studied the bruise, the swollen lip, the faint cut still visible beneath the dried blood. She pulled out her phone and took photographs from different angles. "These are time-stamped," Claire said. "We'll need a medical examination soon. I have a doctor waiting at the hotel. Independent, not affiliated with any airline or insurance company." "Good," Jada said. "Megan briefed me on the way here. I know who you are. I know what you own. And I know you don't want that information made public yet." "Not yet." Claire put her phone away and looked at Jada directly. "Then we need to talk about what happens next because Skyline's legal team is about to go into full containment mode. They will try to reach you before tonight. They'll offer money. They'll offer upgrades. They'll offer a personal apology from someone senior enough to sound important, but not senior enough to actually matter. They will do everything in their power to make you sign a non-disclosure agreement before this story reaches a Angle newsroom." "Let them try," Jada said. Claire almost smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The SUV pulled away from the curb. Jada leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, but her mind was running at full speed. 14 complaints against Captain Hayes. Everyone closed without action. That meant someone inside Skyline had been protecting him. Not just ignoring the complaints, actively burying them. That took effort. That took intention. That took someone with enough authority to make problems disappear. She opened her eyes. "Claire, who handles internal complaints at Skyline?" "Employee Relations falls under the VP of Human Resources, a woman named Susan Fletcher. She's been in the role for years." "And passenger complaints?" "Customer Experience Division reports to the Chief Operating Officer, who reports directly to the CEO, Richard Caldwell." "Correct." Jada pulled out her phone and scrolled through the files Megan had sent. 14 complaints. She opened the first one. It was from years earlier. A flight attendant named Maria Santos had filed a formal grievance alleging that Captain Hayes made racially charged comments about a Latino passenger during a pre-flight briefing. The complaint included a written statement, a witness corroboration from another crew member, and a request for investigation. The resolution line read, "Complaint reviewed, insufficient evidence. Case closed." Jada opened the second file. A passenger named James Okafor, a Nigerian businessman, had written a detailed letter describing how Captain Hayes had him removed from first class on a flight from New York to Los Angeles. The reason given in the incident report was passenger non-compliance. James Okafor's letter described a very different version of events. He said he was questioned, harassed, and publicly humiliated in front of the entire cabin. The resolution line read, "Passenger compensated with travel voucher. Case closed." Jada opened the third file, and the fourth, and the fifth. Each one told a variation of the same story. A person of color in first class, a confrontation initiated by Hayes, an escalation that should never have happened. And every single time the complaint was buried, the passenger was paid off. And Hayes kept flying. "He's been doing this for years," Jada said quietly. "And the pattern is clear," Claire said. "This isn't one rogue pilot. This is a systemic failure. Someone has been signing off on these closures. Someone has been making the decision over and over again. This idea that protecting Robert Hayes is more important than protecting the passengers he's been targeting. Susan Fletcher. That's where we start. But she doesn't operate in a vacuum. Someone above her approved this pattern. HR doesn't bury complaints without air cover from the top." Jada stared at the phone in her hand. Richard Caldwell. She had never met the man. She had acquired her stake in Skyline through intermediaries precisely, so she would never have to sit across a table from someone like him and pretend to be polite. She had wanted to observe the company from a distance, to study its operations, to understand its culture before making any moves. Now the distance was gone. Now the culture had put its hand across her face. Her phone buzzed. "Megan, CNN is calling. Someone on the flight posted video. It's going viral." Jada's stomach dropped. Not because she was afraid of publicity, because events had just accelerated beyond her control. She had planned to spend time building her case quietly, gathering evidence, identifying every person in the chain of command who had enabled Hayes' behavior. She wanted to walk into that boardroom with a file so thick and a case so airtight that no one could deny it, deflect it, or spin it. But the internet doesn't wait for strategy. "Which video?" Jada typed back. "Matt Rodriguez's, the one from the man in the Navy suit. It shows everything. The confrontation, the slap, the aftermath. His face is clear. Your face is clear. Audio is clear. It's already spreading fast and climbing." Jada closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the decision had been made. Don't respond to CNN. Don't respond to anyone. No statements. No confirmations. No denials. Radio silence. "Copy." But Jada, Skyline's PR team, is already pushing a statement. They're calling it an in-flight disagreement between a crew member and a passenger. They're not using the word assault. Of course they're not. It gets worse. They're implying the passenger was disruptive. They're saying the captain intervened to maintain cabin safety. They're already building their version. Jada's jaw tightened. The bruise on her cheek throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She had expected this. She had known that the moment the story went public, Skyline would try to control the narrative. But knowing it was coming and watching it happen were two very different things. "Send me their statement," Jada said. It arrived soon after. She read it in the back of the SUV while Claire watched her face. "Skyline Airways is aware of an incident that occurred on the flight from Atlanta to Chicago. The safety and comfort of our passengers is our highest priority. A crew member intervened when a passenger became disruptive during the flight. We are conducting a thorough review of the incident and will take appropriate action based on our findings. We do not comment on individual personnel matters." Jada read it twice. Then she handed the phone to Claire. Claire read it and exhaled sharply through her nose. "They're calling you the disruptive passenger. They're positioning Hayes as the hero. They don't know who I am. No. And that's the only advantage we have right now. The moment they find out you're the majority shareholder, everything changes. Their lawyers will panic. Their board will panic. Caldwell will panic. And panicked people do desperate things. Then we don't let them find out. Not yet." The SUV arrived at the hotel. The doctor was already in the room. She was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Maria Gonzalez, and she examined Jada with the clinical precision of someone who had seen the aftermath of violence too many times. "Mild contusion on the left cheekbone," Dr. Gonzalez said. "Laceration inside the lower lip, consistent with blunt force trauma. No fracture, no concussion symptoms. But the bruising will get worse before it gets better." She photographed everything. She documented the measurements of the bruise, the exact location of the cut, the degree of swelling. She wrote a detailed medical report, signed it, and handed a copy to Claire. "This is admissible," Claire said. "Thank you, doctor." After Dr. Gonzalez left, Jada sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. For the first time since the flight, she let the mask slip. Not all the way. Just enough to feel the weight of what had happened. A man had hit her. A man in a uniform, in a position of authority, on a plane she partly owned, had struck her across the face because she was black and sitting in first class and refused to be small. That was the truth, stripped of all strategy and legal language and corporate maneuvering. A man had hit her because of who she was, and a company had spent years making sure he could do it again and again without consequence. She picked up her phone and called Megan. "How many views now?" Jada asked. "It's spreading fast." "Who's commenting?" "Everyone. The video is everywhere. People are furious. Skyline's social media is getting buried. Their official statement is being torn apart. People are posting their own stories about discrimination on Skyline flights. There's already a hashtag boycott Skyline. What about Hayes? Someone identified him. His name is out there. His LinkedIn was found and screenshot before he could take it down. 22 years at Skyline, just like he said. Multiple commendations, 2 safety awards. Skyline's golden boy." "Not anymore," Jada said. "There's something else," Megan said, and her voice changed. It got quieter, more careful. A reporter from the Washington Post called the office. "Not about you, about Skyline. She's been working on a story about discrimination in the airline industry for some time. She says she has sources inside Skyline who have been talking to her about a culture of racial profiling. She saw the video and wants to know if the passenger, meaning you, is willing to talk." Jada stood up. "What's her name?" "Amanda Lopez." "How long has she been working this story?" "For months, according to her. She says she has internal documents." Jada paced the room. A Washington Post investigation into Skyline Airways running parallel to the very thing Jada had just experienced. That wasn't coincidence. That was confirmation. The problems she had been reading about in those morning emails weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a disease that had been growing inside the company for years. And now the disease had a face, Robert Hayes' face. And behind it, Susan Fletcher's signature on the closed complaints. And behind that, Richard Caldwell's silence. "Don't return her call yet," Jada told Megan. "But don't ignore her either. Tell her we're aware of her inquiry, and we'll be in touch. Keep it vague." "Got it. One more thing." "What?" "Skyline's VP of Legal Affairs just sent a letter to your hotel. I don't know how they got the address, but it's there. Delivered by courier." Jada walked to the desk near the window. A white envelope sat there, thick and heavy. She hadn't noticed it when she came in. She picked it up, opened it, and read. The letter was addressed to Ms. Jada Mitchell, passenger on the flight. It expressed Skyline Airways' deep concern about the incident aboard the flight. It offered a full refund of her ticket, a travel credit, and access to Skyline's premium passenger resolution program. The letter emphasized that Skyline values all passengers equally and was committed to a thorough and impartial investigation. The last paragraph was the important one. It requested that Jada contact Skyline's legal department at her earliest convenience to discuss the matter further and explore a resolution that is satisfactory to all parties. Attached was a draft non-disclosure agreement. Jada handed the letter to Claire. Claire read it. "A modest offer and an NDA. That's their opening offer for a physical assault by a captain that's gone viral. They think I'm nobody," Jada said. "They think I'm a young woman with no resources and no connections who will take the money and disappear. Are you going to respond?" "Eventually, but not the way they expect." Jada sat down at the desk and pulled up her laptop. She logged into the secure portal that gave her access to Skyline Airways' shareholder dashboard. The stock price had dropped since the video went viral. It was just the beginning. She pulled up the board of directors' contact list. 12 names. She knew some of them by reputation. James Whitaker, the chairman, was a cautious man who valued stability above everything. Elizabeth Grant, the longest-serving board member, was a former airline executive who had built her career on operational efficiency and had little patience for scandal. Stephen Kramer, the newest member, was a hedge fund manager who had joined the board recently and was already pushing for cost cuts. None of them knew Jada's face. None of them had ever spoken to her directly. All of them knew her holding company, Pinnacle Capital Group, as the largest single shareholder in Skyline Airways, and all of them understood on some level that Pinnacle had the power to reshape the entire company if it chose to. Until now, Pinnacle had been silent, patient, observant. The board had interpreted that silence as passivity. They assumed the majority shareholder was content to collect dividends and let management run the show. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jada composed an email. She didn't send it to the board, not yet. She sent it to Megan. Schedule a call with James Whitaker. Use Pinnacle's name. Tell his office that the firm's managing director would like to discuss recent events affecting shareholder value. Don't mention me by name. Don't mention the flight. Just shareholder value. He'll take the call. She closed the laptop and looked at Claire. How long before we can file a formal complaint with the FAA? I can have it drafted soon, filed shortly after. Do it. Include Dr. Gonzalez's medical report, the passenger witness statements, and the video. I want this on record with every relevant authority before Skyline has time to build their defense. What about criminal charges? That's up to the Cook County State's attorney, but Officer Reyes has the police report and the video speaks for itself. If they decide to press charges, Hayes is looking at felony assault on a commercial aircraft. That's federal jurisdiction. Jada nodded. She walked to the window and stood there with her arms crossed and her bruised cheek reflected faintly in the glass. Somewhere in Chicago, Robert Hayes was sitting in a room with a union representative trying to explain why he had slapped a passenger. Somewhere in Atlanta, Richard Caldwell was on the phone with his lawyers trying to figure out how to contain a story that was already beyond containment. And somewhere on the internet, millions of people had watched a man in uniform strike a woman for the crime of sitting in a seat she had paid for. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Mitchell, this is Linda Harper, the flight attendant from your flight today. Jason gave me your contact information from the passenger manifest. I hope that's okay. I need to talk to you. There are things about Captain Hayes that Skyline doesn't want anyone to know. Things I've seen. Things I've been told to forget. Please call me when you can. Jada read the message several times. Then she showed it to Claire. Claire's eyes widened. A flight attendant reaching out voluntarily. That's significant. If she's willing to talk on record, she becomes a key witness, not just to today's incident, but to the pattern. She was scared on the plane, Jada said. She spoke up, but she was terrified. If I call her now and she talks, Skyline will find out. They'll retaliate. They'll fire her, or worse, they'll reassign her to the worst routes and bury her career until she quits. So, what do you want to do? Jada typed back a response. Linda, thank you for reaching out. I want to hear what you have to say, but I want to make sure you're protected first. I'm going to have my attorney contact you to discuss how we can do this safely. Please don't speak to Skyline's legal team before we talk. She hit send and looked at Claire. Can you protect her? Whistleblower protections under federal aviation law are strong. If she's reporting safety violations or discriminatory practices, she's covered. But protection on paper and protection in practice are two different things. Skyline can make her life miserable in ways that are hard to prove. Then we make sure they can't. Claire raised an eyebrow. How? Jada sat down. The bruise on her cheek had turned a deeper shade. Her lip was still swollen, but her eyes were clear, and her voice was steady. And the plan that had been forming in the back of her mind since the moment Hayes' hand connected with her face was now taking shape. Soon, Jada said, I'm going to call an emergency meeting of the Skyline Airways Board of Directors. As the 45% shareholder, I have that right under the company's bylaws. At that meeting, I'm going to present everything. The video, the medical report, the buried complaints, the witness statements, Linda's testimony, and the Washington Post investigation. Every piece of evidence laid out in a sequence that makes it impossible for anyone on that board to look away. Claire stared at her. You're going to reveal your identity. Yes. To the board, the media, and the entire world. Yes. I want it done before Skyline has time to bury this the way they've buried everything else. Before their lawyers can build a wall. Before Richard Caldwell can find a scapegoat and sacrifice Hayes to save himself. I don't want Hayes' head on a plate. I want the whole system that protected him torn out by the roots. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a legal pad and a pen. Then we have a lot of work to do. Jada's phone buzzed again. Megan. The video is everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, BBC, all running the story. Boycott Skyline is trending nationwide. Skyline stock is dropping after hours. Jada read the message and set the phone down on the desk. She pressed the ice pack to her cheek one more time and felt the cold seep into the bruise. The video spread rapidly. Every major news network in America had run the footage. The clip was everywhere. Morning shows, late-night monologues, social media feeds from coast to coast. Millions of people had watched Captain Robert Hayes slap Jada Mitchell across the face, and the number was still climbing. Jada sat in the hotel room with Claire Brooks and watched Skyline Airways try to survive. Their second public statement came. Claire read it aloud from her phone. Skyline Airways has placed the crew member involved in the incident on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are committed to ensuring the safety and dignity of every passenger. Administrative leave, Jada said. Not suspension, not termination, leave. They're buying time, Claire said. Their lawyers told them not to fire him yet, because it could be interpreted as an admission of liability. It is an admission of liability. He hit me on camera. You and I know that. Their legal team is still looking for an angle. Trust me. Right now, there are attorneys in a conference room in Atlanta trying to figure out how to blame you. Jada's phone rang. Megan. James Whitaker's office called back. He'll take the call, but his assistant asked what this was regarding. I stuck to the script. Shareholder concerns regarding recent events. She pushed and I held the line. Good. Set up the call. I'll take it from the hotel. There's more. Linda Harper called Claire's office this morning. She wants to talk today. She says she's been up all night and she can't wait any longer. Jada looked at Claire. Claire nodded. Bring her in, Jada said. Somewhere safe, not the hotel. Somewhere Skyline can't track. Claire was already texting. I have a colleague with office space in the Loop, private, secure, no connection to any airline. I'll set it up for this afternoon. At the scheduled time, Jada dialed into the call with James Whitaker. She didn't use her own name. She introduced herself as the managing director of Pinnacle Capital Group, which was technically true. Her voice was calm, professional, and completely unrecognizable as the woman in the viral video. Mr. Whitaker, thank you for taking this call. Of course, James said. His voice was tight. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept well. Pinnacle is our largest shareholder. We always have time for you. Then I'll be direct. We've been monitoring the situation with the flight. As have we. I want to assure you that the board is taking this extremely seriously. We have our best people on it. Your best people put out a statement calling the assault an incident and gave the pilot paid leave. Silence on the line. Mr. Whitaker, Pinnacle acquired our stake in Skyline because we believed in the long-term value of this airline. But value is built on trust, and right now, millions of people have watched one of your captains assault a passenger, and your company's response has been to protect the captain. That's not what we're doing, James said quickly. We're following our established process. Your established process is the problem. Pinnacle has reason to believe that this captain has a documented history of similar behavior, and that complaints against him have been systematically suppressed within the company. The silence that followed was different from the first one. It was heavier. James Whitaker was a careful man, a man who measured every word, and the silence told Jada that what she had just said was not news to him. Where did you hear that? James asked. It doesn't matter where we heard it. What matters is whether it's true. Another pause. I'd need to look into it. You have time. Millions of views is not a small number, Mr. Whitaker, and it will keep growing. What exactly is Pinnacle asking for? An emergency board meeting. Pinnacle will be presenting a detailed case for immediate structural reform, including changes to leadership. Changes to leadership? James repeated slowly. You mean Richard Caldwell? I mean everyone responsible for the culture that made this incident possible, from the pilot who swung his hand to the people who made sure he was never held accountable. James exhaled. I'll convene the board, but I need to tell you, Miss Director, that Richard Caldwell has a lot of allies on this board. Removing a CEO is not a simple matter. Neither is assaulting a passenger at 30,000 feet, Mr. Whitaker. And yet, here we are. The call ended. Jada set the phone down and looked at Claire. He knew, Jada said. About the buried complaints, he knew. He probably not the details, Claire said, but the culture, the pattern. A board chairman who's been in the seat for years knows exactly what kind of company he's running. He just never had a reason to care. Now he has millions of reasons. That afternoon, Jada and Claire walked into a small law office on LaSalle Street. Linda Harper was already there, sitting in a chair, with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red. Her uniform was gone, replaced by jeans and a dark sweater. Without the Skyline wings on her chest, she looked smaller. When Jada walked in, Linda stood up immediately. Her eyes went to the bruise on Jada's cheek, and her face crumbled. I'm so sorry, Linda said. I'm so sorry I didn't stop him. You did stop him, Jada said. You were the only crew member who challenged him. It wasn't enough. I keep replaying it in my head. I keep thinking if I had just stepped between you, if I had physically blocked him, maybe he wouldn't have. Jada's voice was firm but kind. You are not responsible for what he did. He is. Now sit down and tell me what you came here to say. Linda sat. She took a breath, and then she started talking. I've been flying for Skyline for years. I was young when I started. I love this job. I love the passengers. I love the travel. I love being part of something. But things started changing years ago, right around the time Susan Fletcher took over HR. Before Susan, if a crew member had a problem with a pilot, you could file a report, and someone would actually look into it. It wasn't perfect, but there was a process. After Susan arrived, the process became a wall. What do you mean? Claire asked. I mean, complaints went in and nothing came out. You'd file a report about a pilot's behavior, abusive language, discrimination, inappropriate conduct, and you get a form letter back saying the matter had been reviewed and resolved. No follow-up, no interview, no investigation, just closed. And if you pushed, if you asked what happened, you'd get a call from Susan's office telling you that the matter was confidential and that continued inquiries could be considered insubordination. They threatened you, Jada said. Not just me, everyone. Every flight attendant I know who has ever filed a complaint has gotten that call. It's the culture. You learn fast that filing a complaint doesn't fix the problem. It just puts a target on your back. Claire was taking notes. Linda, how many complaints have you personally filed? 3. All against Captain Hayes. Tell me about them. Linda set the coffee down. The first one was years ago. We were on a flight from Atlanta to Denver. A black family, a mother and father with 2 young kids, had seats in first class. Hayes came out of the cockpit during boarding and asked to see their tickets. Just their tickets, nobody else's. The father showed him the boarding passes and Hayes said, and I'm quoting him, "These must be rewards tickets." The father said, "No, they paid full price." Hayes said, "Huh, just huh," and walked away. But the way he said it, the way he looked at that family, it was clear what he meant. What did you do? I filed a complaint that night. Written statement, detailed account, names and dates. 2 weeks later, I got the form letter. Matter reviewed, case closed. And the second complaint? Years ago, a flight from Chicago to Miami, an older black man, well-dressed, sitting in first class. Hayes did the same thing. Came out, questioned his ticket, made him feel like he didn't belong. But this time, it went further. Hayes told me in the galley, out of earshot of passengers, that people like that shouldn't be in first class because they bring down the experience for everyone else. Those were his exact words. Jada felt the heat rise in her chest again. People like that. I filed the complaint the same day. This time I included his exact words. I asked for an investigation. I even suggested they pull the galley audio recorder because some of our aircraft have them. And same form letter, matter reviewed, case closed. But this time, something else happened. After I filed, my schedule changed. I was pulled off all first-class routes and reassigned to regional flights, shorter routes. Worse hours, less pay. Nobody told me why, but I knew. Claire looked up from her notes. They retaliated. They made it look like a routine reassignment. But I had been on international and premium routes for years. I'd never had a single performance issue. And suddenly I'm flying commuter jets between cities. How long did that last? Months. Then I got my routes back, but only after I stopped asking questions about the complaint. And the third complaint? Jada asked. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, but her voice cracked. On a flight from New York to London, a young black woman sitting in first class. She was wearing gym clothes. Hayes came out and did his thing. Questioned her ticket, questioned her seat, questioned everything. She was quieter than you. She didn't push back. She just showed her ticket and asked to be left alone. Linda stopped talking. She pressed her hand against her mouth. What happened? Jada asked. He didn't hit her, but he stood over her for some time just asking questions. Where did she buy the ticket? Who was she traveling with? Was she sure she was on the right flight? And the whole time, she just sat there getting smaller. By the time he walked away, she was crying. Silently. She didn't make a sound. She just sat there, with tears running down her face, and nobody said anything. Linda's voice broke. I brought her tissues and a glass of water and told her I was sorry. She looked at me and said, "Why does this keep happening to me?" And I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer because I knew it would keep happening. I knew Hayes would do it again on the next flight, and the flight after that, and no one was going to stop him. The room was silent. I filed the complaint that night, Linda continued. And this time, I didn't just describe what happened. I wrote a letter to Susan Fletcher personally, detailing all 3 incidents, describing the pattern, and begging her to take action before someone got hurt. What did Susan do? Claire asked. She called me personally. First time in years that anyone from HR had actually picked up the phone. She told me she appreciated my dedication to passenger safety. She told me she understood my concerns. And then she told me that Captain Hayes was one of Skyline's most experienced and decorated pilots, and that his record spoke for itself. She dismissed you, Jada said. She did more than dismiss me. She told me that if I continued to file what she called unsubstantiated complaints against a senior captain, it could affect my career trajectory. She didn't say it as a threat. She said it like she was giving me friendly advice, like she was doing me a favor by warning me. Claire put her pen down. Linda, are you willing to put all of this in a sworn statement? That's why I'm here, and you understand that once you sign this, there's no going back. Skyline will know. Hayes will know. Susan Fletcher will know. Linda looked at Jada. She looked at the bruise on her cheek, the swollen lip, the thin scar that was forming along the inside of her mouth, and something hardened behind her eyes. For years, Linda said, for years I watched him do this. And for years, I filed complaints that went nowhere. And for years, I told myself that at least I was trying. But trying isn't enough anymore. That young woman on the London flight, she asked me why it keeps happening. Now, I have to make sure it stops. Claire slid a legal pad across the table. Start from the beginning. Every incident, every complaint, every response, every reassignment. Take your time. Linda picked up the pen and began to write. While Linda wrote her statement, Jada stepped into the hallway and called Megan. Where are we? Jada asked. The video is everywhere. Skyline stock is dropping. Boycott Skyline is still trending. 3 sitting members of Congress have issued statements calling for an FAA investigation. And Amanda Lopez from the Washington Post published the first part of her investigation. Jada's heart stopped for half a beat. What does it say? It's devastating, Jada. She has internal emails between Susan Fletcher and the legal department discussing how to handle discrimination complaints. There's one email where Susan writes that the company's priority should be protecting high-value personnel assets from what she calls nuisance complaints, rooted in passenger perception rather than crew behavior. She put that in writing, in an email to the general counsel. Amanda Lopez has the whole chain. Jada leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Susan Fletcher had not just buried complaints. She had built an ideology around it. She had created a framework where discrimination was redefined as passenger perception, and the perpetrators were rebranded as high-value personnel assets. It was the language of corporate sociopathy, the kind of language that allows institutions to do terrible things while maintaining the appearance of professionalism. What about Caldwell? Jada asked. Is he named in the emails? Not directly, but Susan's email is addressed to the general counsel with a CC to the COO, and the COO reports directly to Caldwell. The chain of command is there. Megan, I need everything Amanda Lopez has published, every word. And I need to know how she got those emails, because whoever leaked them to her is someone we need to find. Already working on it. Jada hung up and walked back into the room. Linda was still writing, her pen moving steadily across the page. Claire was on her phone coordinating with the FAA complaint filing team. Jada sat down and opened her laptop. She pulled up the Washington Post article and read it from beginning to end. Amanda Lopez was a skilled writer. She laid out the case methodically, starting with anonymous accounts from current and former Skyline employees who described a company culture where discrimination complaints were routinely dismissed and where employees who spoke up were punished. The internal emails were quoted sparingly but effectively. Each one was a nail in the coffin. The article didn't mention Jada by name. It didn't mention the video directly. It was clear that Amanda Lopez had been working on this story long before the flight. And the timing of its publication alongside the viral video was either extraordinary coincidence or extraordinary journalism. Jada suspected it was the latter. She closed the laptop. The emergency board meeting was scheduled. That gave her time to assemble a case that would force the board to act. She had the video. She had the medical report. She had the buried complaints. She had Linda's sworn statement. She had a Washington Post investigation. She had the FAA complaint. She had Matt Rodriguez's footage and Harold Sutton's willingness to testify as a retired federal judge. But she still needed one more thing. The thing that would make the board understand that this was not a request, not a negotiation, not a suggestion. She needed them to know who she was. Claire finished her call and looked at Jada. FAA complaint filed. They've assigned an investigator. Good. Linda's statement is almost done. It's thorough. Claire, I need you to prepare something for the board meeting. What kind of something? A presentation. Everything we have organized in chronological order, starting with the first complaint against Hayes and ending with the assault on the flight. I want the board to see the full timeline. I want them to understand that what happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system designed to protect abusers and silence victims. I can have it ready. One more thing. At the end of the presentation, I want a single slide. No text, no data, just a photograph. Of what? Of my face, the way it looks right now. The bruise, the split lip, the swelling. I want that image to be the last thing the board sees before I ask them to vote. Claire stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. That's going to be powerful. It's going to be the truth, and the truth is the one thing Skyline hasn't tried yet. Linda looked up from her writing. She had heard the whole conversation. You're going after all of them, aren't you? Not just Hayes. All of them, Jada said. Every person who made a decision to look the other way. Every person who signed off on a closed complaint. Every person who chose comfort over accountability, including Caldwell. Especially Caldwell. Linda put the pen down. Her statement was finished. She pushed the legal pad toward Claire, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there when she walked in. It wasn't quite hope. It was closer to relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying a secret for years and has finally set it down. I have one more thing, Linda said. Something I didn't put in the statement because I wasn't sure it mattered. But now, I think it does. What is it? Jada asked. Susan Fletcher and Captain Hayes. They know each other. Not just professionally. I saw them together at a company event. They were at the same table talking privately, laughing. Someone told me later that Susan's brother flew with Hayes in the Air Force. They go way back. The relationship is personal. Jada felt the final piece click into place. Susan Fletcher hadn't just been burying complaints because of corporate policy. She'd been burying them because she was protecting someone she knew, someone connected to her own family. The professional cover-up had a personal motive underneath it, and that motive explained why the complaints had been met with the same response every single time. Case closed. Jada picked up her phone and sent one last message to Megan. Pull everything on Susan Fletcher, personal and professional. Specifically her brother's military service record, and any connection to Robert Hayes. I need it. She put the phone away and looked at Claire and Linda, two women she had met recently who were now standing beside her in a fight that would reshape an entire corporation. Let's make it count. The morning of the board meeting arrived like a verdict. Jada woke early in the Chicago hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. Her cheek had turned a sickly yellow-green, the kind of bruise that looks worse as it heals. Her lip was still swollen, but the cut had closed. She touched her face lightly, not out of vanity, but to remind herself that it was real, that it had happened, that in a few hours she was going to walk into a room full of people who controlled a billion-dollar airline and show them exactly what their company had done. Her phone buzzed. Megan, everything's ready. Claire's team finished the presentation. The final slide is the photograph. It's going to hit them like a freight train. Jada typed back. What about Susan Fletcher's brother? Confirmed. Her brother served in the same squadron as Robert Hayes. They were stationed together for years. Susan's brother personally recommended Hayes to Skyline Airways when he transitioned to commercial aviation. Susan Fletcher was already working in Skyline's HR department at the time. Jada set the phone down. The connection wasn't just personal. It was foundational. Susan Fletcher had helped bring Robert Hayes into Skyline, and then she had spent years making sure he stayed. Every buried complaint, every closed case, every silenced flight attendant was Susan Fletcher protecting the man her brother had vouched for. If Hayes went down, it reflected on her brother's judgment. If Hayes went down, it raised questions about how he was hired in the first place, so Hayes could never go down. That was the unspoken rule, and Susan had enforced it with the quiet, ruthless efficiency of someone who understood that the most dangerous cover-ups are the ones that look like procedure. Jada put on a black suit, not the gray sweatshirt, not the faded jeans. This time she dressed like the person she was. The suit was tailored sharp, expensive without being flashy. She wore her grandmother's gold chain and a pair of small diamond studs. She pulled her braids into a clean low bun. When she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was no longer the invisible passenger from seat 2A. She was the majority shareholder of Skyline Airways, and she looked like it. Claire met her in the lobby. The board meeting is at Skyline's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. We have a private jet standing by at Midway. A private jet, Jada said. Not Skyline, I hope. Claire allowed herself a small smile. Definitely not Skyline. They landed in Atlanta. A car was waiting on the tarmac. Soon after, Jada walked through the glass doors of Skyline Airways headquarters for the first time in her life. She had owned 45% of this company for some time and had never set foot inside the building. The receptionist looked up, saw a young black woman in a suit she didn't recognize, and put on her professional smile. Good morning. How can I help you? I'm here for the board meeting, Jada said. The receptionist blinked. The board meeting is a closed session. Are you with one of the members' offices? No, I'm the one who called the meeting. The receptionist's smile faltered. She checked her screen, scrolled through something, and looked back up with confusion spreading across her face. I'm sorry I don't have your name on the list. The meeting was called by Pinnacle Capital Group. I am Pinnacle Capital Group, Jada said. The receptionist stared at her. Then she picked up the phone and made a call. Soon after, a man in a gray suit appeared in the lobby. He was sweating. His name tag read Colin Webb, VP of Corporate Affairs. You're from Pinnacle? Colin asked, looking Jada up and down the way people do when reality doesn't match their expectations. I'm the managing director and sole principal of Pinnacle Capital Group. I own 45% of this airline, and I'm late for my meeting. Colin's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, alarm, and then a rapid recalculation of everything he thought he knew about the most important shareholder in the company. He turned without a word and led Jada and Claire through the executive corridor toward the boardroom. The boardroom doors were open. Inside, the board members sat around an oval table. James Whitaker was at the head. Elizabeth Grant sat to his left, her silver hair pulled back tight. Reading glasses perched on her nose. Stephen Kramer was across from her, tapping his pen against the table with barely concealed impatience. The others were arranged in their usual seats, coffee cups and water glasses and leather folders spread before them. At the far end of the table, Richard Caldwell sat with his arms crossed. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the commanding presence of a man who had run a major airline for years and had never once been seriously challenged. His general counsel sat beside him. His chief operating officer sat behind him. He had come to this meeting expecting to manage a crisis, to contain the damage, to offer the board a plan that would make the video go away and the stock price recover, and the whole ugly mess disappear into the corporate memory hole, where all ugly messes eventually go. Then Jada Mitchell walked through the door and the temperature in the room dropped. James Whitaker stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting was called by Pinnacle Capital Group, our largest shareholder. May I introduce Jada Mitchell?" Jada said, taking a seat at the table directly across from Richard Caldwell. "Managing Director of Pinnacle Capital, 45% owner of Skyline Airways, and the passenger your captain slapped on the flight." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the air conditioning. Richard Caldwell uncrossed his arms. He looked at Jada's face. He saw the bruise. He saw the healing lip, and something behind his eyes shifted as the full scope of his situation became clear. "That's not possible," he said. "I assure you it is," Claire said, placing a folder in front of every board member. "Inside, you'll find documentation confirming Ms. Mitchell's identity as the sole principal of Pinnacle Capital Group, along with share certificates, SEC filings, and the holding structure through which Pinnacle acquired its 45% stake." Elizabeth Grant opened her folder first. She read the top page, flipped to the second, and then looked at Jada over her reading glasses with an expression that was equal parts shock and something that looked almost like admiration. "You've been our majority shareholder," Elizabeth said, "and none of us knew your face." "That was intentional," Jada said. "Why?" "Because I wanted to see this company the way it actually operates, not the version it performs for its owners." James Whitaker sat back down slowly. "Ms. Mitchell, the board is prepared to hear your presentation." Jada stood up. Claire connected a laptop to the room's display system. The first slide appeared on the screen behind Jada. "I boarded Skyline flight from Atlanta to Chicago. I was traveling undercover dressed as an ordinary passenger to evaluate the customer experience from the ground level. I had a confirmed first-class ticket. I was seated in 2A. I was reading a book." She advanced to the next slide. A photograph of her boarding pass. "Captain Robert Hayes exited the cockpit and approached my seat. He questioned my right to be in first class. He demanded to see my boarding pass, which had already been verified by the gate agent. He interrogated me about how I purchased my ticket. When the flight attendant confirmed my seat assignment, he dismissed her." Next slide. A still frame from Matt Rodriguez's video showing Hayes standing over Jada's seat. Over the course of the flight, Captain Hayes left the cockpit to confront me. He attempted to have me involuntarily downgraded to economy. He threatened to have me met by security in Chicago, and when I refused to leave my seat, he physically assaulted me. Next slide. The frame from the video capturing the exact moment of impact. Hayes's hand, Jada's face, the blur of motion between them. Stephen Kramer put his pen down. Elizabeth Grant took off her glasses. Two board members at the end of the table exchanged looks of undisguised horror. "This is the medical report documenting my injuries," Jada said, advancing to the next slide. Contusion to the left cheekbone, laceration inside the lower lip, documented by an independent physician. She didn't pause for reactions. She kept going. "But this is not just about what happened to me. This is about what has been happening at Skyline Airways for years." The next slide showed a timeline. Complaints stretched across the years, each one representing a complaint filed against Captain Robert Hayes. Jada walked the board through every single one. The Latino passenger, the Nigerian businessman on the New York to LA flight, the young black woman who sat in her seat and cried. Each complaint was summarized in 2 sentences. Each resolution line read the same way: "Case closed. Case closed, case closed." "Complaints," Jada said. "Every single one was closed without meaningful investigation. Every single one was handled by the same person." The next slide showed Susan Fletcher's name and title. Susan Fletcher, Vice President of Human Resources. She has been personally responsible for closing these complaints. And the reason she has protected Captain Hayes is this. The next slide showed 2 photographs side by side. Susan Fletcher, her brother, and beneath them a military service record showing that her brother and Robert Hayes served together in the same Air Force squadron. Susan Fletcher's brother personally recommended Robert Hayes to Skyline Airways. Susan has been protecting her brother's referral ever since, not because the complaints were unfounded, because holding Hayes accountable would reflect on her family's judgment. Richard Caldwell leaned forward. "Ms. Mitchell, I had no knowledge of any personal relationship between Susan Fletcher and Captain Hayes." "Then you should have," Jada said, "because it's your job to know. It's your job to create a culture where complaints against the same employee don't disappear into a filing cabinet. And it's your job to make sure that a pilot who has been discriminating against passengers for years is removed before he escalates to physical violence." She advanced to the next slide. It was the Washington Post article. Amanda Lopez's investigation laid out in black and white with the internal emails highlighted. This article contains internal Skyline emails in which Susan Fletcher describes discrimination complaints as nuisance complaints rooted in passenger perception. It describes a systematic culture of suppressing employee reports and retaliating against whistleblowers. She looked directly at Caldwell. "This happened under your leadership, Mr. Caldwell. This is your company. This is your culture. And the world is watching." Caldwell's face had gone gray. His general counsel was whispering in his ear, but Caldwell wasn't listening. He was staring at the screen, at the complaints, at the emails he should have read years ago, at the photograph of Susan Fletcher, next to the military record that explained everything. Jada advanced to the final slide, the photograph Claire had taken in the hotel room. Jada's face, bruised and swollen with blood, dried on her lip. No text, no caption, just the image full screen projected on the wall behind her. Nobody breathed. "This is what your company did to me," Jada said, "and I am the 45% owner. Imagine what it does to passengers who have no power at all." She sat down. The room was silent. James Whitaker counted the seconds. Elizabeth Grant spoke first. "I move for the immediate termination of Captain Robert Hayes, the immediate termination of Susan Fletcher, and the initiation of an independent investigation into Skyline's complaint handling processes." "Seconded," said a board member from the end of the table. Stephen Kramer raised his hand. "Before we vote, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. The CEO's accountability." Every eye turned to Richard Caldwell. Caldwell straightened in his chair. The color had returned to his face. But it was the wrong color. It was the red of a man backed into a corner. I have served this company faithfully for years. Our revenue has grown under my leadership. Our route network has expanded to— Mr. Caldwell, Jada interrupted. Millions of people have watched your captain assault a passenger. Your stock price has dropped. Members of Congress are calling for an FAA investigation. The Washington Post is running a multi-part investigation into your company's culture of discrimination, and the woman your captain struck is sitting across the table from you, holding 45% of your shares. Revenue growth is not going to save you today. Caldwell looked at his general counsel. His general counsel looked at the table. I'd like to propose a voluntary resignation, James Whitaker said carefully, with appropriate terms, of course. There will be no golden parachute, Jada said. Mr. Caldwell will resign with standard separation terms. No accelerated vesting, no bonus, no consulting arrangement. He will issue a public statement acknowledging the systemic failures that occurred under his leadership. That's not acceptable, Caldwell said, and for the first time his voice cracked. I built this airline into what it is. What it is, Jada said slowly, is a company that let a pilot assault passengers and called it a closed case. You didn't build that, Mr. Caldwell. Then who did? Caldwell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'll need to consult with my attorney, he said. You have until the end of this meeting, James said. The board will vote on Elizabeth's motion now. The vote was unanimous. Captain Robert Hayes terminated. Susan Fletcher terminated. Independent investigation approved. And a separate motion introduced by Stephen Kramer, a vote of no confidence in CEO Richard Caldwell, effective immediately. Caldwell looked around the table. Faces looked back at him. Not one of them offered an alternative. I'll resign, Caldwell said quietly. Effective today. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the boardroom without looking at Jada. His general counsel followed him. His COO followed the general counsel. The door closed behind them and the room exhaled. James Whitaker turned to Jada. Ms. Mitchell, the board would like to discuss interim leadership. Given the circumstances, we believe the company would benefit from your direct involvement. I'm not here to run an airline, Jada said. I'm here to fix one. Appoint an interim CEO from the existing executive team. Someone clean. Someone who wasn't part of the cover-up. I'll work with the board on permanent leadership selection. But my role is governance, not operations. Elizabeth Grant nodded. That's wise, and frankly, it's more restraint than most majority shareholders would show. I'm not most majority shareholders. No, Elizabeth said. You are not. The board meeting continued. They established a timeline for the independent investigation. They approved a new whistleblower protection policy. They created a passenger advocacy office that would report directly to the board, bypassing HR entirely. And they authorized Jada to make a public statement on behalf of Skyline Airways. That afternoon, Jada Mitchell stood in front of a bank of cameras outside Skyline's headquarters. The bruise on her face was visible. She didn't try to hide it. Megan stood behind her. Claire stood beside her. Linda Harper, who had flown in from Chicago that morning, stood to her right wearing a new suit and a face full of quiet courage. Jada spoke without notes. I boarded a Skyline Airways flight as an ordinary passenger. I was treated as a threat because of how I looked. I was questioned, harassed, and physically assaulted by the captain of the aircraft. Today I am standing in front of you, not just as the woman who was attacked, but as the 45% owner of Skyline Airways. The captain who struck me has been terminated. The head of HR who buried discrimination complaints has been terminated. The CEO who presided over this culture of silence has resigned. She paused. The cameras clicked and flashed. But terminations and resignations are not reform. They are consequences. Reform requires rebuilding. It requires new policies, new leadership, new accountability structures, and a fundamental commitment to treating every passenger and every employee with dignity, regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or what seat they sit in. She took a breath. I want to speak directly to every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong on an airplane, in a boardroom, in a classroom, in their own country. I know how it feels. I know the weight of being judged before you speak, dismissed before you're heard, and punished for refusing to shrink. I want you to know that your dignity is not negotiable. It is not a privilege granted by someone in a uniform. It is yours. It has always been yours. And anyone who tries to take it from you will answer for it. She stepped away from the microphones. The press conference erupted with questions, but Jada didn't take any. She walked back into the building with Claire and Megan and Linda, and the glass doors closed behind them, and the noise faded. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace instead of pressure. Linda caught up to her in the hallway. Jada. Jada turned. Jada. That young woman on the London flight. The one who cried, her name was Lila Robinson. She's young, she lives in Brooklyn. She stopped flying after that trip. She told me she'd never set foot on an airplane again. Find her, Jada said. Bring her to me. Why? Because she asked you a question, and you didn't have an answer. Now we do. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but these were different. These weren't the tears of helplessness. They were the tears of a woman who had spent years waiting for this moment and had almost stopped believing it would come. Sometime later, Skyline Airways announced a comprehensive reform package. A new chief diversity officer reporting directly to the board. Mandatory bias training for all flight crew. An independent ombudsman to handle discrimination complaints. A passenger bill of rights enshrined in company policy. And a fund to compensate passengers who had been victims of discrimination on Skyline flights over the past decade. Captain Robert Hayes was charged with felony assault under federal aviation law. He pled guilty and was sentenced. His pilot's license was permanently revoked. Susan Fletcher was terminated and barred from the aviation industry by the FAA. Her brother issued a public apology saying he had no knowledge of his sister's actions, but took full responsibility for recommending a man who had proven unworthy of trust. Matt Rodriguez, the attorney in the Navy suit, became the lead counsel for the Passenger Compensation Fund. Barbara and Harold Sutton testified before a congressional hearing on airline discrimination, where Harold's testimony was described by the committee chair as the most compelling statement this committee has ever heard. Linda Harper was promoted to head of Skyline's new Crew Accountability Division, where she personally reviewed every employee complaint that came through the system. And Lila Robinson flew again. Jada booked her a first-class ticket on the first Skyline flight, operated under the new policies. Lila sat in seat 2A. Nobody questioned her. Nobody looked at her twice. She drank sparkling water with a thin slice of lemon and read a book. And when the flight landed, she called Linda and said 2 words. Thank you. Jada Mitchell never took the CEO position. She remained a silent shareholder attending board meetings, reviewing complaint data each morning with her black coffee, and watching the company slowly, painfully, genuinely transform. She never gave another press conference. She never wrote a book. She never sold her story to Hollywood, though offers came. When people asked her why she stayed silent, why she didn't capitalize on her fame, why she didn't become the public face of the movement she had started, she always gave the same answer. I didn't do this for attention. I did this because a woman named Eleanor Grant wrote an email that deserved an answer. and because a flight attendant named Linda had the courage to speak when everyone else was silent, and because a young woman named Lila asked a question that no one should ever have to ask. Why does this keep happening to me? It shouldn't. And at Skyline Airways, because one woman refused to break, it never would again. In the end, Jada Mitchell didn't win because she was rich or powerful. She won because she refused to shrink. That single, quiet decision to stay seated, to keep her dignity intact, even when a man in uniform tried to rip it away, carries the most powerful lesson any of us will ever need. Your worth is never up for debate. No uniform, no title, no angry voice shouting, "You don't belong here," gets to decide who you are or where you deserve to sit. When the world tries to make you small, the bravest and most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to become small. Jada showed us that real strength isn't loud or flashy. Sometimes it looks like a young woman in a gray sweatshirt, hands trembling under a paperback, choosing calm courage over explosive anger. She taught us that true justice often begins with one person who simply will not look away from cruelty, from silence, from systems that protect the wrong people. And most importantly, she reminded us that change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it starts with one passenger in seat 2A who decides enough is enough. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it made you think about the times you were made to feel invisible, or the times you stayed silent when you should have spoken, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life when you chose not to shrink? And if Jada's courage inspired you even a little, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next story that reminds us who we really are.